until they can carry with them into peace those around them. And this service is not the individual looking for release for himself, but sacrificing his own hope of peace to give peace to someone else. Now, when we get into this level of thinking, we really begin to understand love. For love is always the forgetting of self. It is not because we lose all the attractiveness of it, which we will have to come to in a few minutes, but because of the infinite magnitude of the situation. The Buddha to come, according to Northern Buddhism, and that includes the Tibetan, Japanese, Korean, and Bhutan groups, is called Maitreya, or Miraku. The word means kindness. That is the meaning of the word. It's not a name really, it is a word. And the definition of it is that Miraku is the hope of all nations, the hope of all that lives. And at the end of all strife, the second coming of the Messiah, Miroku is the desired Messiah to come in Buddhism. The second coming of Christ is kindness in the human heart. You'd go a hard time to get a better philosophy than that. It would be very difficult to find a more ennobling concept. And yet there's something about it that is so essentially true. And in Northern Buddhism especially, the realizations of these facts have never disturbed the individual. They have never made them sorrowful or feel that they are frustrated or that they are inhibited or that they cannot do what they want to do. Because according to their thinking, when love comes, you do what love wants you to do. You find your own complete happiness and fulfillment in the service of values higher than yourself and or more needy than your own. Until these realizations strike us, we have very little understanding of the responsibility of true love. Now, in other nations also, we find, especially in the words of Christ, insistence upon love. We often think of Christ as a spirit of love, and this probably is the essential meaning embodied in a great cosmological phenomenon. But the actual thing, as Paul says, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And among the words of Jesus, we remember the ones that goes to this way, those who do not love their brother who they have seen. How can they love their God whom they have not seen? The idea that the individual can have a religious life without expressing creative and constructive affection is just wrong. Because there can be no religion apart from the practice of the virtues attributed to the sacred books as necessary. Paul says, and the greatest of these are faith, hope, and charity, now translated love. And the greatest of these is love. Now, the idea of placing affection as the standard of conduct will probably come as much of a surprise to you. But in the great pattern of things, we all exist because of a love beyond our comprehension. We all live because of a beautiful world that was given to us. Wonderful opportunities. We bring other children into the world with the opportunity to love them, to help them to grow and to improve and to fulfill their destinies. Children are not ours to control or demand. They are ours to protect and serve and bring up to the point where they can be released constructively into society. We must do almost the same thing with the children that when we release the birds in the Japanese ceremony. We release all life to the fulfillment of itself but we do all that we possibly can to make that life as rich and noble as it can be before it goes out on its own journey. All these things are values that are not difficult. They're not sad, horrible things. They are not the cause of atomic bombs and all this type of thing. The thing that is causing our trouble is that in some strange way we have mistaken the meaning of the word love. Perhaps one of the problems that we have is that self-interest takes dominance over practically every other emotion in the lives of modern people. Each individual is protecting himself against those who in one way or another have despitefully used him. He is therefore inclined to try to return evil for evil. If someone is unkind, he feels justified in being unkind also. And on this policy, unkindness goes on forever. For there's never a time when we will not have some aspect of it, unless as individuals we take a new viewpoint of our own lives. How can we as individuals therefore find out a better use of our own emotions? How can we recognize the true meaning of affection? Now we descend into what might be termed the secular level of emotions. We no longer think just in terms of the divine plan. We think in terms of daily relationships, human love, personal love. This level is, according to both the Chinese and the early Christians, a perfectly noble level. Love in its truest sense is always right. It is always virtuous. It is always ensoling and inspiring. Therefore, that the individual who wishes to find God should give up human affections is wrong, because God is in those human affections and he must perfect his understanding there before he can go further. Therefore, love in the family, love in the home, personal affections for each other are very noble as long as we do not pervert them, as long as we do not misuse these emotions or compromise them or defile them in one way or another. The actual answer to most domestic problems is therefore a clean love. And until we get that the human relationships will remain embittered and obscured. Now, love in family and home is something which makes things happy. Most of the peoples of other countries who have their own little philosophies of love are laughing people. We are the only ones, apparently, who find love a burden or the basis of something which is too difficult for us to handle. Well, perhaps it's due to the complications of our way of life. We have become so bound up in transitory and impermanent values that we have lost a sense of directness. We are now constantly frustrated, worried, frightened, and seeking in affection not an expression of service, but an escape from some physical restriction upon our own conduct. Therefore, it is true that we have to work out the problem of human relationships on the level of an integrity. For people in all walks of life, the foundation of love is law. In other words, the law as it is, the law of love, is the only basis upon which problems of human existence can be arbitrated. There is no way in which we can ever solve the human problem without love. There is no way also that we can love as long as we are selfish. As long as our own ulterior motives dominate our human relationships, as long as our love centers upon the gratification of our own desires at the expense of others, that every time in which love loses its liberty, loses its freedom, is a misfortune. But love free will never break a rule. Love free will never do that which is unrealistic or impure, because love itself is the very essence of God's affection for mankind. Therefore, anything that is a corruption is no longer love. Anything that is dominated by ulterior motive is no longer pure affection. As long as self-interest, selfishness, gratifications of appetite dominate affection, we will never have any real love. And as a result of the lack of this love, homes are breaking up every minute, and young people are almost afraid to establish them. Then we look out into the great pattern of the world, nations out to destroy each other. For why? For what reason? For what justifiable cause? None. The hatreds which we have nursed for generations simply corrupt and corrode our own lives. Family feuds go on for generations, and everyone is seeking to solve a problem, seeks to find self-gratification or self-freedom from responsibility. We believe that everything that goes wrong should be blamed on someone else. I know when I was quite young, we had kind of a family of feuders. Our background had 3 generations of people who weren't speaking to each other. Well, every one of them had good old Scotch reasons, but they weren't really very good. But after a while, my illustrious grandmother, whom some of you have become acquainted with, decided that I needed a little religious training. So, being a Scotch lady, she chose the Presbyterian church, and I went to Sunday school there. And that was my first direct contact with the Bible. We had readings, but the first time we'd really gone into serious thought about it. And in the course of the readings, I found out so many wonderful things that seemed so good, such as to forgive your adversary immediately and do good to those that despitefully use you. Well, that sounded to me like I was already a missionary. So I took the glad tidings home, and I was thoroughly punished. I was told that it was none of my business, and that anyone who should say that you should love those that despitefully use you should have your head examined. Well, it's in the Bible. It is known that these truths are there. But the moment these truths come in contact with a personal antagonism, so much the worse for the truths, they don't have a chance. And that is happening all the time in our modern society. Talking with young people, they tell me that they have no real intention of establishing permanent relationships. They're just going to enjoy life the best they can as they go along. And if it doesn't work out, that's just too bad. Well, this type of thinking is bound to ultimately destroy most of our cultural life. The compromise of our integrities is never worse than when it compromises those divine attributes which have been placed in the human being. And one of them is the love of God living in us. And where we treat this badly or misuse it or pervert it, we have committed truly a sin against the Holy Spirit. And this is not something that we can do with impunity. It gradually results in increasing difficulties and tragedies, and life becomes more and more unlivable, which we don't really want to have happen. Now, we also find another interesting area of affection, and that is, in a sense, love of knowledge. We all want to be well educated, we want to go to school, we want to develop some skill in life. Now, a skill in life is a very good thing to develop. Unfortunately, our modern educational system does not do an outstanding job of this. It has more or less compromised things down to the economic level. We work because we hope to make money. And if we do not make money, we soon find out that we are not welcome in this society. But education and knowledge are important because we have too many people of good intention who really are lovable people, but they have no experience in anything. They are unable to handle their own affairs. They are unable to help other people. They simply do not have the practical insights that make usefulness significant in society. Therefore, in connection with knowledge, it seems that we who love God should also take special pains in how we learn the lessons of life. We can always learn some of them in the University of Hard Knocks, but that isn't quite sufficient. Everyone should dedicate a skill to the service of humanity. If we love people, and if we love God, and if we love truth, we have to develop a practical way of service. Love without some type of commitment to usefulness is merely a travesty, an excuse, an evasion, or a simple example of ignorance. To find a way of helping is our way of loving people. And to love them and to help them, we must be helpful people. And this means that a part of our lives should be devoted to the other interpretation of love, charitas, or charity. Charity being the service of others, the doing of good deeds to those who need them. Now, at this time in our cultural existence, we are not much devoted to this because of the economic involvements. And the whole problem of trying to be a servant in the house of the Lord gets pretty difficult. We cannot always do all kinds of big things, but if we have some background of a skill of some kind, we can help somebody sometime. If we learn how to run a family, if we know how to clean a house, if we know the principles of proper food, if we know anything that makes us helpful, we can help. So every life should have in it a dedication to being helpful, to find some way of expressing our concern for the common good, and should come forward whatever necessary to support ideas and principles which seem to be better than those we are living by today. Therefore, part of our affection for our neighbor and our world is that we shall inspire the improvement of the various systems which are necessary to the maintenance of civilization. All these things come very much into focus. Now also we have another problem that's rather sticky wicket, and that is, how much should we love ourselves? I don't think most people underestimate this too much. They do fairly well in most cases, but we have to think this through a little bit more. Sometimes we ridicule the idea of anyone thinking about themselves or loving themselves. But actually, if we get onto the proper level, it's just part of the same picture. There's no reason why we should love other people and leave ourselves out. Because actually, the same power of good that we hope to share with another, we must hope to share with ourselves. So each individual has the duty and responsibility to make him or herself lovable. If, however, the individual includes himself with humanity, he then has certain rights also. He has certain privileges and certain obligations which he must meet in order to get along with himself constructively. Each person, examining his own nature and his own temperament, should come to the conclusion that he is worthwhile, or if he isn't, that it's time to become that way. The person should be able to look into his own life and be satisfied that he has done a reasonable job with it. He should not run away. He should not corrupt his body through all kinds of dissipations. He should not have attitudes that are obviously unreasonable. He should not cater entirely to the selfishness of gain, exploitation, or profit. Nor should he put his own happiness above all other happiness. These things are mistakes. But the proper attitude is that we should be happy along with others who are happy. That we should more or less make happiness a stronger rule in our conduct of affairs. We all have a right to be considered significant to some degree. And the better we become, the more thoughtful, wise, intelligent, and kindly we are, the more we have a right to feel that we are of some interest and value to the world in which we live. Therefore, it's not a mistake for the individual to have certain affection for his own inner life, but he should have affection for that part of himself which Emerson calls the oversoul. He should have reverence and regard for the eternal dwelling in him. And he should be a true and faithful servant of the will of his own soul. When this happens, then he is qualified to take a serious interest and have a deep respect for his own nature. Because actually, his own nature in a sense is an illusion. Well, the fact that the individual is a living creature by himself is a more or less of an illusion. We are alive because life is. We are alive because we are in a universe which is filled with life, and that is one life, one tremendous energy, and that life is truly the life of God. Therefore, the God in us must become part of our daily experience. We must live always as though the special guest of heaven was going to be at our table. We must never do things which heaven would not want to see, because as surely as we live, the heaven in us does see. We should try desperately to please that which is better, to please that which we know to be our true selves. For to the degree that we do this, our own lives are enriched and we become more useful in the advancement of society. Therefore, in education, we should have the skills that are given by sciences, arts, philosophies, religions, but we should ensoul these forms of knowledge with the inner consciousness and light of our own lives. Therefore, if we want to become scientists, we can dedicate science to the great scientist in ourselves. Because finally, the great power of light has one of its attributes as science, another as philosophy, another as art, another in some other branch of learning. But all forms of learning, in the last analysis, are simply aspects of the one divine power. And that divine power flows through everything with skill dedicated to love. Every art and science is an expression of divine love. And if man perverts this, as in the development of nuclear weapons, for example, he is perverting a power and is transforming a love that is there into a fear or a hate or a scheme which he is trying to advance for his own purposes. It is therefore very, very necessary that the individual ensoul the things that he is doing. In the shopkeeper, the parent, the teacher, any art, science, craft that we belong to should be ensouled. And when it is ensouled by a natural love and concern, we will have good lives. Now some will say that it's a big price to pay to have to do all these things, because actually very often, because of our own ignorance, willfulness, the things we ought to do seem terrible. The things we want to do seem best. But this is only of a seeming. We have to consider another dimension also, that nearly all nations and peoples and philosophies and religions have considered. And that is the brevity of human life. The idea that we are going to be able to build a good life in the span of our years, and to do as we please most of the time, and give little or no thought to the major values of living. And finally, we will settle down to playing cribbage in our old age or something of that nature until we drift out of here. This type of thinking is contrary to everything that is necessary and useful for us. If love was something that died with the grave, if there was no more of it, if it had no existence except in some conscious decision of ourselves in the presence of adversities, probably there wouldn't be any particular value in it, except it would be a much more pleasant world to live in while we are here. But if we are right that man is part of an eternal life motion, and we do not cease at the grave, if there is something that goes on, something that is ultimately judged or measured, something that we have to live up to or get over, if there are such values as this that endure beyond the grave, then love becomes the most important thing in the whole world, because it is the only emotion that we can take into the presence of divinity. It is like, for instance, if our love is pure and true, our love as we go on into the universe is really the divine love going home in us, fulfilling its eternal purpose, and we become the good and faithful servants. So somewhere in this world there is a standard of excellence, a standard that has been violated from the beginning. A standard, however, which a few noble beings have maintained in public for teaching, and many quiet, simple citizens have lived by throughout their years. There is much more love in the world working than we realize, but we don't hear much about that. Love isn't news. Scandal is news. The mistakes we make become famous. Our virtues apparently are ignored. But actually, whether they are or not is not important. Actually, the important thing is what we are doing to ourselves constantly. It is not important whether what we do is recognized. The important thing is to know that the best in ourselves is being attained, that we are truly going on to something that is worthwhile and necessary for the advancement of the common good. Now, we all need a few props occasionally to kind of make life a little more interesting and meaningful to us. And in the world around us, for thousands of years, men have built great churches. They have built cathedrals and synagogues and mosques and temples. They have done all kinds of things to honor the invisible power of good. And they have established the concept that these sacred places are the houses of good, and they are also the houses of love. In these sanctuaries, it is assumed that man can come in peace and quiet and communion with an eternal spirit that has the power to bestow upon him the peace of God. In the early church, the bishops exchanged the peace of God. It was a representation of the inner fraternity of living things, the realities which we share and by which we become truly one family, one life in truth. Now, all these